Hello, kids. Welcome back to another episode of the Devil You Know, the Daredevil Podcast. So, of course, I am Phil. That is Lilith, and it's that time again. Another chat with our good friend, Mr. DG Chichester. Hello, sir.
Hello, guys. How are you both? How have you been? Everybody well?
Pretty great.
Oh.
How was your convention?
That
I've been
was
dying to know.
my
I saw
first
the
question.
pictures.
How was Terrificon?
Terrificon was, I'm told you have to say, it was terrific. And it really was. Mitch Halleck, I made the mistake of using another adjective to describe it, and he scolded me and said it has to be terrific. It's on brand. And it was. It was great. It was pretty well attended, but everybody was, I think, still trying to keep some sense of distance and, masked and conscious of health, which was good. But it was, as the first convention I'd done, and, as I calculated it, over 20 years as a guest anyway. I've been to other shows just to go, but to go as a guest, it was nice to see that people were surprised I was alive and around and was actually at a convention. And I had a little monitor running with different podcasts, including yours, highlighted with a QR code people could scan and listen in on stuff. So fancy, exactly. And but it was great just to see people surprise and talk about what they liked about the work, and not so much about what they didn't like. Most of them seemed to like things, and I got some really good stories, out of it. One guy came up and said, "Listen, I'm not going to say that what I read about Matt Murdock and Daredevil made me want to become a lawyer, but I'm a lawyer now." So that was cool. And I was right across from Lee Weeks, who, of course, I worked with on my first run on Daredevil. So we threw stuff back and forth at each other to and handle the interest in Daredevil 300 and those sort of things. So it was really a great show. I need to pace myself differently, because by the morning of Sunday I could not walk, because people would come to the table and I would stand up and say hi, and then I'd stand while I was signing stuff, and I realized I'm out of practice. So but it was terrific.
I thought your hand was going to be worse than your legs. Just
no, the hand was pretty good. A little bit of a tension, but no, the legs were. The concrete floor and cowboy boots and standing up and down adds up after a time.
We'll have to get you one of those standing mats. Let us know the next time.
Exactly. A gel mat, like take care of the guy. No, it was really, really fun. And I hope, there might be more, in the future. It'd be fun. And today I'm just going out after we finish here. And of course it's free comic book day. And so be checking that out.
So are you willing to travel for cons then, or?
Yeah, I mean, this was not a big travel. This was probably two hours away from where I am. But I think I'd be interested in a little bit of travel, all depending on, what our overall world pandemic situation is and other things. But a lot of people kept coming up. Are you going to Baltimore? Are you going to Baltimore? I was like, are you inviting me to Baltimore? Because you don't just show up and say, hi, I'm here. It doesn't work that way, I don't think.
Come on, Steel City Con, invite this man so I can buy him a lunch. Come on.
Exactly.
I wouldn't even wish Tampa Con right now, because Florida's a mess. So,
yeah.
Until Florida can get their act together, I'm going to have to refrain from having Tampa Con call you.
But, it's clear people are eager to be together and share what they're jazzed about. Their interest in comics or cosplay or whatever it was. There was a really palpable sense that people were enjoying that. It is clearly, from many people, this was like the first thing they'd gone to in a long time for anything, let alone comics.
It's good to see the smaller cons flourish, especially with the disappearance of WizardCon and a couple of other, institutions. So it's good to see cons flourish and pick that up.
And this was, I can't remember what it was called when it was, I think it was the same show that was in Bridgeport, Connecticut, several years back before it transitioned to Terrificon and moved up to this casino. So it clearly had grown in size and scale. And it was a very, I think, reasonably sized convention. It was not small, but it definitely was not wall-to-wall crazy town either. So good balance.
Good to hear. We definitely look forward to when the world gets back to normal to doing more of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Heck yeah.
So let's get into it, Phil.
Get into it.
All right. So, yes, today we're talking about something a little different. Daredevil and Batman, eye for an eye.
Uh-oh. Well, good thing I have my copy as well. So,
So I thought this one would be interesting, just because I wanted to ask you about some of the behind the scenes, like what's involved in, like, I know there's a process for regular comics, but it's like when you get two companies together, is it like twice do you have to talk to two editors? Do you have to write?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, these things are a balancing act, right? Because you're not only dealing with one set of editorial mandates, you are dealing with two. And then how are the companies operating together? Are they really adversarial? Are the corporate overlords, Warner Brothers and Disney at this point, even willing to talk? How do the lawyers, agree of what these two intellectual properties are doing together? I don't know how many of these things happen nowadays, but they were, I think, a little bit more available and frequent earlier on because there was a lot of editors who had been and were friends. And then through different circumstances, they ended up at different companies, right? Mike Carlin, who was Mark Grunwald's assistant at Marvel, would later go on to become, the premier Superman editor at DC for various reasons. Transitioned out of Marvel, not for anything about him. But that opens the door then, I think, to those amalgam comics, right? There's that whole amalgam line of things. Yeah. And I think in a similar way here, we had Denny O'Neil, who was the premier Batman editor, and Ralph Macchio. And I think Ralph was Denny's assistant at one point. But they were certainly friends and friendly. And so it became, well, not just a given of saying, hey, let's do a book together, because there was lawyers and other things that probably had to happen behind the scenes. But it was a lot easier to check out and have Ralph say, could we do something like this? And Denny, being much more considered, saying, well, let's talk about it and figure out what's the story, because that's going to be the first thing. Do we do something like this? Not just because it might generate some sales. Certainly that's a big driver. That's why the publisher is going to decide to instigate something. But I think the friendship of those guys helped also smooth things and move things no matter what.
But yeah, they don't do any Marvel DC crossovers anymore, but
which is a shame, because these were always, I mean, these I know when I was growing up through comics, and they were rare, but when that would happen, that was like, oh my God, the worlds are coming together, you're crossing over. And these were a ball to do for the same reason, because you're interested as a creator to say, what would it be like to play in that world, and vice versa.
So the editors are on board. Do they even get notes from higher up? I mean, again, you said a balancing act. Is it like, oh, you can't show Batman being more capable than Daredevil and vice versa? Is it was it very...
No, I mean, not in this case. I mean, again, this DC was owned by Warner's at that point, but in my tangential knowledge and experience, Warner sort of treated DC at that point as sort of, a research lab for other properties. They would sort of look at them and not really pay much attention to what was going on. And Marvel was not owned by Disney at that point. They were owned by whatever other corporate entity was, but the notes were all just from Ralph and Denny. And Denny was very, very precise about things. And I respected that. And in looking back at this, I wish I had more direct dialogues with Denny, who I knew from when he was on staff at Marvel, to pick up on even more things. Like at one point, and this went through a few drafts, to get it to even where it is now, which is good, but there's certain things I would have done differently in retrospect. But I had a scene where Batman was driving the Batmobile, through to get to New York or something, and Denny scolded me It's like Batman's going to drive this on the open road, in this way. He's going to go through the Lincoln Tunnel or whatever else. That, there was that sense of, okay, this is fantastic, but there's also a sense of reality, especially with these characters. So little things like that also add up to the way that you think about how the characters think and then how the characters are going to react. And there's that little bit of, I think there's a line in there even where Daredevil's like, you drove that from New York? Don't be an idiot, Well, don't make yourself look even more foolish. Of course, I have other ways of getting things, around without being seen. So that generated even little things like that generate your understanding of how a character operates.
Oh yeah, it'd be great to get notes from Denny. I mean, he'd been in the business how many years, and he wrote both these characters at different points. So it's like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Absolutely, and I remember reading Denny's Batman and being hugely influenced by it and his use of language and his use of storytelling. And I think he was one of the first writers I remember noticing that he was injecting other things that were clearly of interest to him into his stories. So he would put in, I remember the first time I think I ever came across the word mantra was in a story that he had done with Ra's al Ghul and Batman was preparing himself for a battle and focusing his energies. And it's like, I'm thinking to myself, this is really cool. The use of that word didn't take me out of the story, but I was at a point where I was probably starting to think about, there's a story behind this versus the story I'm just reading. And there's aspects this guy is bringing into it. And that was, different than, say, somebody who's just writing an amazing story about killer puppets, invading a city and, Superman's got to blast them apart with heat vision or something. So he was intimidating, frankly. I will say that. Not in his personality, but just from my own point of view of like, I mean, a lot of the guys I worked with were, wait a minute, I read your stories. But Denny, among many, for me at least, was like, oh, you're Denny O'Neil. But he was, but there was no reason for that. He was very approachable and really nice, but he also wasn't going to take any nonsense when it came to characters he really understood.
But yeah, comics have taught me a lot of vocabulary. You taught me yourself the pro bono.
See, there you go. Maybe you could have become a lawyer too.
So were the villain? Oh, sorry, Philip.
No, go ahead.
Villain choices like suggested, or did it just come to you and they go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense"?
It made sense. I mean, as I started to kind of figure out what kind of story it would be, I think I settled on Two-Face very, very quickly. He was probably there right from the beginning, simply because of the lawyer aspect. It was like, wait a minute, you've got a lawyer and a lawyer. Mm-hmm. Why not do something with that? Which I think actually plays out really well. And in revisiting it, for this, I think those aspects play out nicely. But I think there's more I could have done with it. And I think there was that sense that I think it was a wrong sense now in retrospect that you had to pull in somebody else, that you had to give equal treatment. Well, we've got a Batman villain. I guess we need a Daredevil-ish villain or a Marvel-ish villain, as well. And Hyde made
Mr. Hyde,
exactly like, yeah, the twofer, right? It's sort of like the two sides of the coin. Maybe a little bit too on the nose, but he fit the mold for that. But I also think he complicated, even though he's the driver of parts of the story, becomes the vessel for what Two-Face is trying to do by using him as a Instapot to kind of cook up this this technology. There's that tendency you start to add too many elements to it. We saw that in a lot of movies, certainly, especially Batman movies. Oh, we got one villain. Now we've got two. Now we've got five. Is there any room for Batman in this? I don't think it quite breaks.
Spider-Man tried to follow them all.
Oh my God! Yeah, but we got a dancing scene out of it, which we'll always have. But and I don't think it breaks the story. But again, it's easy to look back at things and then start to pick them apart based on who you are now. And I think that it could have been an even stronger story, maybe focusing on just, say, Two-Face.
And was it like a mandate that you had to use the characters as they were at that point? Because technically
at Elseworlds, tail. So
yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you couldn't have used Jack Batlin, or did you have to use this version of Daredevil because, hey, maybe some Batman fans would be picking this up who weren't reading Daredevil and be like, okay, this is what Daredevil is at
they're
this
so
moment.
similar. If only Daredevil had money.
Exactly. Not quite. Not quite. Well, at this point,
Get to the pitch.
I'm trying to think about timing. I don't. Was this? I guess this was Batman by this point. I don't think there was a mandate. There wasn't a mandate of what to use or how to do it. But I think I think the way the characters were balanced out in this story made more sense for what the story was. Obviously, if he had been pretending to be Batlin, then you've got to bring that into the story. And there was enough packed in here that that by complicating it with one more layer would have probably been something that would have broken it, more. The fact of the Elseworlds thing didn't really come into play. I'm a firm believer in, well, this Elseworlds is an imaginary story, or Alternate Worlds is an imaginary story, or What If are imaginary stories. They're all imaginary stories. Right? They're all don't tell them. I always loved that opening, and that it was like the last two issues of the original Superman in Action Comics that Alan Moore did, and he had to put that kind of code in there, of like, this is an imaginary story, but of course they're all imaginary stories. So, they obviously told them this isn't really happening because John Byrne's taking it over next issue. Okay, none of them happened. But at the same time, those are things, I think, labels of convenience the companies want to put on them. Yeah. Even Daredevil 380 was, somewhat the same, where they want to put this label of, well, this is a story that might have been or happened earlier in his career or something like that. So for me, I just stuck to the characters and worried about them putting the Elseworlds thing after the fact almost.
So I think, again, I just thought maybe there'd be a whole bunch of more mandates on like a crossover because you are dealing with two different companies, but I guess you're saying there really wasn't?
There wasn't. I mean, if there had been, it would have been much more problematic. And I think this is, if comics have become more complicated, they've done themselves a disservice. These types of comics, at a big owned by, big companies, they've probably done themselves a disservice by adding those additional layers of what you can or can't do, because and you would run into mandates at different editorial levels for different projects when there was the big company-wide crossovers or a big event or something. You had to get your character into a certain place at a certain time, or you had to acknowledge that something was happening if they weren't directly involved, or you really wanted to use a character and my story was going to hinge on Spider-Man appearing in this issue, but the Spider office could say, nope, too many Spider-Man appearances this month, it's oversaturated, good luck figuring out what you're going to do, it's not my problem.
Comics could never have that problem.
Yeah. but comics is, for as much as it's a big team, right? Essentially you've got a pretty small team on a book, right? You got an editor, an assistant editor, a writer, penciler, inker, colors, letterer. That's your primary, group of folks. And to some degree, the ones driving it are mostly the editor, assistant editor, writer, and artist. So as long as you're making sane choices, and nobody's going to probably at that point affect you. And then when you had that friendship of Denny and Ralph, and that professional respect as well, and that connection, it cut through a lot of stuff. At some point, somebody had to sign off, and say, yes, we will do this book. But they're doing it more from, okay, Daredevil sells this and has this popularity, Batman sells this and has this popularity. Sure, put them together and you'll have a fudge sundae. It's even better for us from a bottom line, as long as you're going to deliver on something like that. That's what we care about. And Now, again, there might be a lot more people who think they own the characters, but I wish there was more drama to it in that respect, but it was actually nicer for, you know, the one drama to it, which I never really understood, and it kind of rattled my cage a little bit, was they slow walked this project forever. And, you know, you know, it kept getting pushed back. And in fact, that's one of the reasons it lost the original artist, because Lee Weeks was supposed to be the original artist on this. So there's your little bit of, wow, people know that.
How did Scott McDaniel,
So Lee was supposed to be the artist on this, and was excited about doing it, and probably would have gone in a much different way altogether if Lee had been on it. But a combination of it kept getting pushed back, and they were not giving him a firm commitment to the rates that he wanted. I'm remembering this like 22%. So if Lee comes back and says, Dan got it all wrong, let's go with Lee's version. But
he's more than welcome to come and set the record straight.
But it just, the lack of commitment, you know, for him was a very important thing. You know, he wanted to know, we're gonna do this book, we're gonna do this book on the schedule, we're gonna do this book at the rate that I promised. And when it didn't happen, by a certain point, he said, I'm out. I can't keep hoping and wondering and putting my plans against this. And in fact, it led me to ask for, I need some assurance, Ralph, too. Are we going to do this book? And I got a very half-baked letter from you know, from Bob Harris, you know, finally when I asked, and I have it somewhere, and it's like a one-line letter, and it's kind of like, yes, we will be doing this book, and you will be the writer, so long as you maintain the standards of editorial, you know, professionalism that Marvel expects. It was something like that. And to me, it was like this eye-rolling moment of, like, I've done dozens, hundreds of comics. I've been on staff. You all know me.
You wrote Daredevil for how many years before this?
Yeah, and so, like, the fact I had to, you know, have it written out that I would maintain the levels of professionalism was, man, you're really looking to, like, kind of get under people's skin here a little bit. But I put it in a drawer and moved on. But, you know, while it was disappointing to lose Lee, obviously, Scott was not an also ran. You know, Scott was obviously a great partner and had great associations with the character and the characters, because by that point he'd, you know, moved on to Nightwing and such. So he had experience in Gotham, and it felt like, okay, this will be a great opportunity. Let's see if we can enlist him into it. And thankfully he accepted, and we were able to get rolling with that.
Yeah, they must have been impressed, because a few years after this, he got the Batman book. So
yeah. And I mean, I think there's a lot of logic, you know, to that for the work he was doing and doing the work with Chuck Dixon. And so, you know, there's a lot of synergies, you know, with that.
So you said there were a few things you would change in hindsight. What else? You know, because I thought it was a pretty good issue.
It is. It's a pretty good issue, and I think it's got the opportunity to be a really great issue, you know, or story in there. And I think I said at one point in my newsletter, you know, it's one of the only plots I had that was outright rejected. You know, the first version of this, Ralph just called and said, "Yeah, it's not going to work." And, and I don't even remember what that was. I mean, it was not this. It wasn't like, oh, I just changed the scene or two. It was a complete rewrite. Oh. And I think it was whatever, I don't know, wherever my head was at, whatever was kind of going on, it was off the mark. Maybe it was the sense of, wow, bringing these guys together. Maybe it was too intimidating, or I was off my game, but that level set me and made me rethink that, of how am I going to approach this? I think did we lose Lilith?
No.
Just on mute. You know, it has that opening that spends too much time sort of, I think, setting things up and has these guys come together separately, which is necessary to a degree. But I would have brought, like, say, Two-Face into that scene instead of a mention. I would have brought him in earlier, right? They don't show up until about, a third of the way through or so. I think that would have made more sense, and then started kind of like turn the wheels with Murdoch and Dent a little bit more. It would have changed the dynamic of the scenes up front with Daredevil and Batman some, where it wasn't just confronting each other, mini fight, which is kind of a trope. And
classic setup.
The classic setup, which, hey, it works. I think it's a reasonable form of it here, but I think I could have done, in hindsight, it's great. You can look back at something and say, oh, I should have done that. I think that would have been better. I think I was obviously still in my obsessed with technology mode aspect, as maybe my leftover notes from Tree of Knowledge or something like that, influencing aspects of the cyberpunk elements of the story. And while I think that's kind of interesting, I was obviously fascinated with this whole body horror, body transformation thing of what's going on, watching too many David Cronenberg movies. But no such thing as too many David Cronenberg movies. Exactly. But I could have streamlined that MacGuffin a little bit, Phil, I think, as well. It pays off in the end, I think, like all the pieces come together and it kind of connects. But the upfront part where it's like, why are they stealing this and what's going on here? And, it takes a little bit of time. And I really like the incidents and the dialogue of the scenes where Murdoch and Dent are in law school. But I'm not sure, and I no longer have the plot, so I don't know. But I think it would have been more effective if the dialogue was, on the characters in the scenes than as these separate sort of written pieces. And because I think the dialogue works and I think the moments work, but there's a difference, I think, when you interpret comics and you read comics, when somebody's saying it versus it being in these separate panels. Sometimes this device works, right? Where you've got images and then you've got prose and dialogue written alongside this. I did this in Daredevil 380 in some of the courtroom scenes, and I think that works really well. But rereading this, I think it actually sort of takes you out of the story a little bit when I'm trying to get you into feeling that these guys had a relationship that will pay off later.
Is that like a writer's trick where it's like, yeah, this isn't going to fit in a word bubble, so I'm not going to completely obscure Scott's art, so you do it that way?
I don't know. I really don't know. I'd have to go back and read the plot and know why I did it this way. I don't know. Did I suggest to Scott, hey, let's do it this way and I'll write the prose out of it? Or did he sort of illustrate it this way? And I mean, he must have been leaving room for copy because, for the writing, because there's no way he would have left a gutter this big. So we must have talked, unless he was, rulers, I'm out of here. But and you can also reposition elements on a page sometimes. From an editorial point of view, you can cut panels and move them a little bit, give them a little bit more breathing room. But I must have maybe suggested, hey, because this is a flashback, maybe we handle it this way, and he bought into it. But there's a lot of, I think the prose in this section pulls you out of it, right? To me, it does now, anyway, a little bit. It's good motivation and connection, but I think it could have been handled a little bit more in that way. So, it's easy to pick the stuff apart, but there's things that work. I think the whole Harvey Dent, Matt Murdock thing is keen. I think the turn at the end where Dent, sort of struggles with that reminder from Daredevil works really well.
Oh yeah.
I think Dent's insults to Batman are good. Gotham irritatingness, Gothamitis irritatingness. Where he identifies the rodents in the room. there's you know, but these are kind of the things you discover along the way. Probably could have used a third or fourth draft to get to really the right place, but that's beyond the fact at this point.
No, like I said, I really enjoyed the story. I'm sure it probably was a mandate, the page count, because I was like, man, I could have used more of this.
Oh yeah, the page count was just what it was. That's tough, right? But you need to, but that's when you need to, yeah, you need to think about what kind of story you're trying to tell. 48 pages is, what is this? This 48? I think it's 48. You know, that's over twice the length of what a typical comic was at that point. So that's good breathing room. But man, you can fill up 48 pages easy.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're doing Batman and Daredevil. It's like, how often does this happen? You probably want to stretch your legs, you know.
Yeah, but that's also why, again, it's hindsight. But going back, uncomplicating the problem in saying I've only got 48 pages. I've only got 48 pages. Big air quotes for those just listening. That's still something you can fill up really quickly. So uncomplicate your situation so you can let them breathe more. And again, I'm a more hopefully mature and better writer than I was then. So it's easy for me to pick on that guy, you know, and say, what the hell were you thinking? Why were you doing that? But I probably would have said now, just Two-Face alone, right? Again, could have been a good somebody to play off the two sides of Daredevil and Batman more, right? Even though Lilith, like you were saying before, oh, it's just Daredevil without money. I mean, it's Batman without money. And certainly at one point, Murdoch had money, right? He had a penthouse. He was a lot more in that let's just keep recreating the millionaire playboy vigilante type mold. But that would have been probably an interesting thing. Maybe the whole story was more from Two-Face's point of view, and Two-Face playing off the light-ish, darkish sides of the characters in the coin with some kind of, you know, MacGuffin or rationalization that I don't even know what it would be. But now I'm thinking about that, and just as we're talking and saying, wow, that would have been an interesting story. And maybe the whole thing's from Two-Face's point of view, for that fact, you know, and could have been an interesting thing. Maybe I'll call, you know, Tom Brevoort and say, and I'll pitch that. Him and Carlin.
I did enjoy the contrast of, you know, Maddie's whole final justice versus, you know, good old Harvey Dent's rehabilitation.
Yeah,
I did enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean,
how the times have changed.
How the tides have turned, but that was, you know, but that's also little bits of the characters, right? You know, it's you know, Dent was willing to play, you know, with the rules, you know, a little bit, and Murdoch was always, they're either on the mat or they're off the mat.
We're not talking about Typhoid Mary. I'm kidding.
Exactly. Yeah, you know, he's a complicated character. You know?
But I know you've written a little Batman, but did you enjoy writing Batman? Do you have like some Batman stuff in your head? Like you could maybe write some more, because I mean I guess they put out DC's November solicits a day or two ago, and they said like half the line coming out in November is either going to be Batman or Batman centric, or Batman's going to show up in a book. Like at least 50% of the line is going to be some Batman something.
And is that news, water makes things wet?
Exactly. Does that contribute to? Maybe I'll see that when I go to the comic store later. Do they think that contributes to? It's the only thing they've got to hook people with, or does it create like oversaturation? Like you get way too much.
I guess they think Batman sells because
Batman does sell, but I think there's also that matter of oversaturation. You know, I certainly know that Danny Fingeroth, who was the Spider-Man editor, you know, was always very conscious of that. And like I was saying before, like I want to use Spider-Man, or I want to use Ghost Rider, you know, I want to use Ghost Rider, I want to use the Punisher, these popular characters.
The 90s. Yeah,
but there were, you know, smart editors would hold the line on certain things. Nope, Punisher's already in 6 stories this month, or 12 stories, or 24 stories, whatever. But there was a line at some point that you would draw, because otherwise it just waters everything down.
Well, I think like Lilith hinted at, it's like, I think these days it's like, oh, can you squeeze a little more Batman into this book? Or, hey, can you use Spider-Man over here somewhere? Or...
Yeah, and again, it makes sense from a sales point of view. These are popular things. You're trying to sell the books.
And then we have so much synergy now in this modern era as well, where everything they're trying to line this up with this release date.
Hey, there's a movie out.
Right. But it's also, what are you trying to do with the characters? If you're trying to maintain a certain personality for Spider-Man or Batman or anybody, is that happening in every single one of those books? Or is one, a lazy writer or artist or something like that deciding, web fluid's a little slow today, I'm just going to have Spider-Man pull an Uzi out, or Daredevil's going to rip the car door off, because that's a lot easier, because then trying to figure out how I was going to get the guy out of the car. But to your question, Phil, I think I was clearly walking a careful line, I think, here, distinguishing Batman from Daredevil. Yeah. The way that they spoke, the choices they made, the way that they approached the scene, the crime scene, the situations. And to me, who the heck knows where my mind was then, but looking at it now, I think it would have been a lot more fun to play with him in that way. And the aspects of him that I was clearly laying into, certainly to try to find synergies with Daredevil, was around that observation and the sensory aspect and the detective aspect of it, which I always, again, getting back to my roots, dug from Batman is the world's greatest detective, right? That was the subhead line, or on certain comics or whatever. And sometimes that comes out, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes he's just the Dark Knight. He's the grim force, the avenger of the night, and that was my bad Christian Bale. And that would be more like this. And that aspect gets lost.
Oh, yeah.
But I was obviously zeroing in on that here, and I think that would have been a lot of fun to play out. Did you guys play video games at all? Did you ever play, the original Arkham game, the Batman Arkham games?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, those, aside from the fact of just being, wow, I'm in Gotham City and I get to go anywhere, I love those because they did have that detective aspect. I mean, certainly he slugged plenty of people and things, but there was those great scenes of you're breaking down the scene, right? You're having to figure things out as the world's greatest detective. And if I had a chance at Batman more then or now, for that matter, I think I'd love to lean into that and play up the detective aspect as much as the grim shadow of the night.
What was that book, Batman's Grave, that you liked so much, Phil, that you said brought that
a lot of that, he was going through a couple different crime scenes. Yeah, and they really played up it with Batman as a detective. Yeah,
really.
That's what me and Lil thought. Yeah, what was it, like a year or so ago? Yeah,
almost like 2 years at this point. Yeah.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, 2020 just.
2020 is still
black
still
hole time. Yeah.
It's called Batman's Grave.
I think it was The Batman's Grave, but yeah, it was like 12 issues, and it was him investigating a couple different crime scenes, and it all culminated in like a big like conspiracy thing at the end. But yeah, I mean, it was good. Me and Lilith are always saying that's like our favorite Batman stories, comics, movies. It's like, yeah, the action's nice, but when you can like mix in the detective work and stuff, it's
that's what starts to distinguish it. Go ahead, Lilith.
I think you did a great job with Gotham and the like juxtaposition of New York, even though that whole thing. It's like, well, technically.
And that's I think that's the interesting dynamic to the character. Again, at least for me, and you have to find those hooks with any character, otherwise they quickly become just the same, right? And you never want things to be the same. And we got a lot of grim Avengers in comics. And even though Batman's the template for that, Batman, it doesn't need the circle doesn't need to go completely around and then just kind of get back to him and let's make him even more grim, right? Yeah, he's grim. He had a bad day. He went insane. He's not a balanced character. All right, we got all these things. But if that's all he is, then it's anybody, right? And that detective aspect, that training, that precision. And again, I just go back to the first impressions I had of him in a really strong way were those Danny O'Neill stories that I read. And the Ra's al Ghul stories are the ones that really jump out to me. And that precision of that character and the way he trained and the way he moved and the way he thought and the way he analyzed his opponent was not just, I'm a better fighter than you, I'm bigger than you, I've got a longer cape and pointier ears than you. I have things going on. I have these skills and I know how to use them. It's very Liam Neeson, right? Certain skills.
So yeah, well, I mean, again, would you be interested in writing a Batman? I'd love to see like you on like a monthly Batman book. And again, that seems like that's what they're really trying to pump out there. Again, it's either Batman books or like, they have related stuff, Nightwing, Harley.
Right.
The Bat family, the Bat umbrella.
Right. I think it's like showing up at the Baltimore Con. I'll just show up at DC and just say, hey, I'm writing a title, and just see how that goes. Or I'll just write it and send it in, and then see somebody will just say, oh, this must be something, we'll publish it. Who would turn something like that down, right? Even in terms of doing something like this, or you're never going to turn away an opportunity like that. Maybe you would, actually. Who knows? If somebody came to you and said, it's got to be this, and it's got to play into all these pieces of continuity, and you've got to play up all this other aspects, this other team left over, or you've got to incorporate all those things, that suddenly becomes so complicated. What chance do you have to do anything, right? And that might be in place where, yeah, wow, great, I'll have my name on a Batman book, but I'll spend so much time doing other things. What's the point of it?
So is that the comics business? At least now, it's like you can't like send them a script, even with your body of work. Do they have to come to you and be like, "Hey, would you like to write a Batman book for us?" Do you have to wait for them?
I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, that's not something I've played in long enough time to sort of say. I think that I think people can break in any number of different ways. I think it's probably trickier, just like there was when I was, working full time in the business. There would be people who would have a reputation, and editors would go after them because they wanted that value of somebody, right? I want, Jim Lee on my book, I want Neil Gaiman on my book or something. And you try to get them because that's going to boost your profile. But there'd be other people who would diligently try to kind of break in, and they would send in plots and scripts and artwork, and some followed the rules, right? And by the rules, I mean, generally when I would meet people, I would say, hey, listen, send me a proposal, make it short, get to the point. This way I can evaluate, and then we can talk. And then I'd get people who would send in 300-page scripts and say, man, when you read this, you're going to hire me right away. Yeah, when I read that. And then sometimes you'd meet people, mostly artists, I would say, at conventions, and you would see something, and you would immediately know that person's got chops, and you'd be able to bring them, in right away and get a start on some things. I imagine there's probably still components of that across the way, but I have still probably a handful at this point, of contacts that I could probably talk to, but by and large, it's kind of a cold call at this stage where I could use my reputation as a door opener, but a lot of folks would be like, what do you have to bring us that whatever, name somebody, that.
Well, the 90s are back in effect. That 90s nostalgia.
And I think, well, listen, we're talking, why, I'm doing other podcast interviews, I get invited to a convention. There is a nostalgia for certain things like that. Or people who read those when they were younger are now in positions where they're like, hey, we want to talk about this some more, which is terrific. I'm enjoying that. But whether that opens a door or something, I don't know. and I'm not angling for that. The only thing I'm angling for that with is possibly is one story with Mark Nelson that I was talking to somebody at Terrificon with. Mark Nelson was the artist who probably most famously did Aliens, but a lot of other things. And we had actually developed an entire what if story, which was this whole thing called Hexpionage, which was this what if Doctor Strange ran S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury was sort of, on the outs with him, but he had to recruit Fury for a special mission, of some form. And we had actually pitched it. We sold it. I wrote it. Mark illustrated half of it, which is crazy cool looking. And then the whole comics market crashed. They fired the editors. The book vanished into just some elseworlds, but Mark still has the artwork as far as I know. And it's one of the few plots I have left, so I keep toying with the idea of calling Tom Brevoort and saying, listen, we've got a half-finished story that you paid for somewhat back in the day. What if we took what you can see from here and finish it off? It would be different now than it was then, but that would be kind of a cool thing. So
I don't know if you'd be interested in going back, but I mean, I don't know, is Chip Zadarski leaving Daredevil soon? Because isn't he one of the ones going the Substack? I
think Chip is. I don't know Chip, and I'm throwing his name out like I do. Yeah, Chip, I believe so. I think I just read that in probably a Substack newsletter. But he's leaving Daredevil, and then that Substack thing is going to be an interesting experiment to see how they tell stories, in that, and how people respond to it.
Is that like the new image of the modern time?
I don't know what it is. I'm fascinated by it. I mean, that's where my newsletter is. It's on Substack.
Oh, yeah. I'm totally interested.
Me too. I think it's
something has to happen to shake up the industry.
I was going to say it must be something very attractive about it. I mean, James Tynion, who's writing the main Batman book, and Nick Snyder, who's writing Amazing Spider-Man, are both leaving to go there. I'm like,
well, I'm sure they're offering them a boatload of cash, which they should be, because that'll cover their part of it, and I assume that also covers the creation of the rest of the comic as well, right? It's not just the money to them. But that's got to cover who's the artist, who's the finish. And so that's an advance in essence. And then, and if you maintain control of it, right, Substack's taking a piece of it, if for the paid, whatever, what is it, 10 or 15% or whatever it is. But as I understand it, they maintain the ownership of the properties, so they can go do what they want with it afterwards.
And the creative freedom, they can do whatever they want with their book.
And the creative freedom, but it's on them to be something that, now they have a base, they have an audience, the audience will follow them. James, again, first name basis for people I don't know, but I think I read in his newsletter, he expected to maybe hit his goal of subscribers by the end of the first week. And he said he hit the goal in the first 3 hours, right? So whatever he was looking to raise as paid subscribers, he hit fairly quickly. And so I think that's the certainly a big appeal, right, for a creator to have that freedom. I think the one thing you've got to watch for there is who's your editorial point of view, who's your editorial eye on these things. I'm assuming he had a good editor on Batman, right? And let's assume my friend Chip, had a good editor on Daredevil, right? I know I benefited from having good editors. And when I didn't have good editors, or I was left to my own devices, even with my own sensibilities, you can go off the reservation pretty quick. So you want to make sure that, hopefully that's part of the package too, and how they're thinking about it. But I think that's going to be a real great place to hopefully see some some good additional comics that would have been harder to then say, well, we can't do these in print because we've run out of our budget, for the year.
My whole point was just I would love to open like the the previews or whatever, and after Chip leaves, just see T.G. Chichester's back on Daredevil after how many years?
That would be interesting. That would be cool. I don't know if I'd want to write the regular book though.
Oh, right.
I don't know that. I'm a lot more interested with characters like Daredevil or Batman, but let's say Daredevil. Just thinking back to those series that we were gonna do, that I think I mentioned before. There were these contained stories where you're going to be able to explore things with the character in the world, and then kind of bring them to a finish, as opposed to the continuity aspect of comics where you keep going on and on and on and on, and then it can run out of steam or fuel, or how do you keep all the pieces moving? There's a nicety to sort of being able to complete a story and walk away from it, and then come back to the world in another way.
Yeah. Lilith, did you have some kind of what if pitch for Daredevil for him?
Did I?
Wasn't it what we were kind of talking about before? It's like, what if Matt Murdock had grown up in money like Bruce Wayne? How would that have changed his moral character and everything? And
yeah, he wouldn't be the same, but it's interesting. We got a glimpse of it, but just to see that full-on old money Matt Murdock.
Did you ever see the not to pat myself in the back? Did you ever see the what if issue I did, Lilith?
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, 73. Yeah.
So it was originally called "What if the Kingpin had adopted Daredevil," and then they changed it to "What if the Kingpin owned Daredevil," which was a weird turn of phrase. But it was sort of, the proposition was when Jack Murdock was killed, for whatever, I can't remember the exact reason off the top of my head now, the Kingpin was there, or in proximity, and saw this kid crying and alone, and took him under his wing. So Murdock was raised essentially by the Kingpin, in that money, in that surroundings, with all the abilities he had, and sort of became the Kingpin's right-hand man in a way, and so was raised in a somewhat money and certainly morally compromised situation.
I will have to definitely go check that one out.
I like that story.
I'm not a big what if girl, to be honest.
No,
I don't actually even like a lot of Elseworld tales, although some of those are the best DC stories. So
it's it's the joke we had was always all what if stories either end pretty much back exactly where they started. Like the thing that was going to happen always happens anyway. The Fantastic Four ends up being formed, or the universe explodes. Those are the only two options that happen. Because of this consequence of effects, the butterfly effect takes effect, and the entire universe explodes because of that one, thing. Because Cap's shield had 4 stripes instead of 5, instead of 3, the entire universe explodes. So. Yeah.
And get Franklin Richards on the phone.
Yeah.
Either someone else puts on the suit, or there's a big body count.
Exactly. Kind of like, yes, we still have a Cap, and that's what I'm kind of interested to see where they go with the rest of these what if animations.
Oh yeah.
To get back to the story, though, I do like that you remember that Harvey did have humanity. I think a lot of people forget that about Two-Face. They just want to do Two-Face and not Harvey Dent.
But that, that was critical to me. I mean, that's, I think, in all self-analysis, that's why I'll stand behind the story for all the things I picked at it and said, oh, I should have done this or should have done that. That's the spine of the story, which should have been stronger throughout, was Harvey Dent's a lawyer, Matt Murdock's a lawyer. Like, the law matters to them in different ways, but equally important. And the aspect of Dent and that relationship they had when they were so young, even though it's make-believe, is critical to who is critical to the story, and is also critical to who he is. Otherwise, it's not Two-Face, it's just Ugly Face. Right, there's and that if I ever wrote that character again and had a chance to play it out, that would be a point of discussion with an editor of like, what can we do there? Because if you're not playing both sides of the coin, it's just a bad guy, a bad guy who occasionally, you're right, who occasionally flips the coin, it comes up clean, and he walks away from the situation instead of executing everybody. And is that interesting? Just like, again, is Batman that interesting if all he is the Grim Avenger? I don't think so, because what do you got to work with? You play the note once, and then you just keep plinking at that make-believe piano behind you, again and again and again, of just hitting the same note. And as a writer, or you look for those moments you draw out, and that's what I look for here. I mean, that's what's going back and saying, okay, what do I know about these guys, and how do I start to draw out the little bits and pieces of who they can be and what they can do?
I mean, there seems to be a big interest in Harvey Dent lately. I mean, they did like a 2-part animated adaptation of Batman: The Long Halloween.
That's right. That's right. How was that?
It was good. I mean, I'm a little. I don't know.
Long for
I mean, the part 2 is almost 90 minutes. I mean, I enjoyed that. I think sometimes their animated stuff's too short, but I mean, I thought it was one of their best animated things in a long time.
Okay, I'll have to check that out. We'll have to dig into that, because
part 1 and part 2, it's over 2 hours, so altogether.
Yeah. Okay, not bad.
I just want to commend you. I don't know how hard it was for you, but if I was a writer writing Batman and Daredevil, it would take so much restraint not to just be like, and they fight for 8 pages. Like,
well, I think I have them fight for at least 4 pages, which is again probably 4 pages too long. But
no, not at all. Like, that's kind of like the whole thing that like kind of drew me in about the story. It's like, ooh, Daredevil and Batman, yeah, let's see these fighting styles. So yeah,
this man earns his paycheck. Come on, Lil.
I know.
If I could have gotten them to do like two 48-page issues, then I could have done the first one just all fight, and then the second one, work it through there more.
That would have been all.
I think the story is great. You're a writer and you have your hindsight, and you're gonna nitpick, but I'm just gonna tell you, it's a really good, solid story.
Thank you, Lilith. That's I will take that, and I will agree with that. And nitpicking's easy, right? Then that's the editor of me coming out and saying, "Yeah, go back and change it." Wait, I can't. But
yeah, no, definitely. If you're a Daredevil or Batman fan or both, yeah, definitely. If you can pick this up, pick it up, because I don't know.
You found that balance. Like, sometimes when you read the story, like, what was that last crossover that we did? It's just like, I think the other guy came out on top.
Now, didn't they do? And I haven't read them. Didn't they do like 2 or 3 others of 2 or 3 other Batman Daredevil team ups?
I know they did at least one more a few years after this. I know. Yeah. And
how does that? I'm not looking for praise or destruction. How do those stories play out? What did they do?
I mean, it was all right. I think what was the other one we did was Alan Green.
Yeah, one was just basically a MacGuffin, like for 3/4 of the story, and then they finally show up.
We
did two Batman, Spider-Man ones too, which both DC one and Marvel one, both were written by J.M. DeMatteis.
Oh, well, he's good, to say the least.
It was really good because they both seem like really different like styles, and it's like, man, if I didn't know, I almost wouldn't know the same man wrote both of them.
Did they come out back to back, or did they come out years apart? Okay, because sometimes that's a fun device too. If you're doing those sort of things, and say you do 2 issues, and then you do one,
but they were meant to come out closer together.
Oh, so maybe he did them at the same time.
Maybe they did the same thing to him they did to you. It's like maybe they like kept it,
A lot of those Elseworld tales are like that, though. They get delayed.
Yeah. But I'm thinking like he could have, one. Sometimes you do one from like the DC perspective and then one from the Marvel perspective.
Oh, and it was definitely that.
Yeah. It's like because Batman's got to win in this one, Spider-Man's got to win in that one, and then everything equalizes and we go home happy.
Yeah, because
as my tweet says, Batman really wanted Spider-Man to put on a Robin suit.
I love that. That was awesome.
Yeah, because the first one was in '95, like right in the middle of the Clone Saga, and it was like Joker and Carnage, and then what was the other?
Oh God!
Like 5 years later or something, and it was Kingpin and Ra's al Ghul.
But again, it's the same thing. They're both so, it's that sense of everything's got to be equal, right? But by God, Ra's al Ghul, Kingpin, Joker, Carnage, even who I'm even not a fan of Carnage, but still, any one of those four is enormous enough to carry the story on his own. Right? Yeah, you start to put them together, and all you're doing is looking for, pissing contests, between these gigantic characters, and it overburdens the story. And I think if I ever had a chance to do it again, let's pick the best villain, the best antagonist, and figure out a way for her or him to work for this story, as opposed to like keeping adding Catwoman and Penguin and Mr. Freeze and and just you get to Batman Forever or something like that in no time at all.
Do you think they would let you get around that just by creating a brand new character that neither one has ever encountered, and that way you could get through the one villain thing?
You might, but I think you also part of the intellectual and also profiteering reason you're doing these things is to play off the worlds, right? So while you might so I think you want to play with that continuity, right? You want to play with that world, and to some extent or another, and draw something new out of it, like the Dent is a lawyer, let's remember that, and let's play that up aspect with the other guy who's a lawyer. That would have been a cool story on its own. Daredevil and Two-Face.
And Foggy in the background. I never liked that guy anyway.
But I think, I think that, Phil, that would be, interesting. But I think, you look for, playing off other things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I couldn't have just done a Batman Daredevil story and focused on them more, right? There could have been just, like, what's their whole shtick and what's their whole moments together. It doesn't necessarily need to hinge on a Two-Face or a Mr. Hyde or Stiltman. But who knows?
But yeah, that's the other thing I don't like. I love these stories, but it's like until these guys Marvel and DC can make a deal again, we're never going to see that Matt Murdock, Harvey Dent connection again.
Yeah, and that's the downside of these things, and then them labeling these Elseworlds, aspect. But you can't, by rights, you also can't play with that, right? You can't suddenly have, in regular Daredevil continuity, Chip, mentioning, Harvey Dent, or something like that, because it's like, wait a minute, these got to be seismic events, even if that seismic event is just Denny and Ralph, making something happen.
Harry Bent instead.
Exactly. Or you get something weird. There's a typo in this book too that was really weird. I don't know if you noticed that. Like there's the last page, which is of course the worst place for it. There's the first line of dialogue from Bruce Wayne, and he says, if you're here looking for new clients, let me say that Gotham City can be a dangerous place. And then somebody took the last caption of the book, which was "end" with a question mark, and for some reason it's there at the end of the balloon, and it's just a weird thing that sort of throws the whole pacing off. Anyway, again, nitpicking.
Perfectionist.
Exactly.
All right. Do we have any other questions for this man, Lo?
Nope, not at all.
But thank you.
Story, pick it up, kids.
Yeah,
pick it up, guys. It's fun.
Go to Amazon, but use our link in the show notes.
Yes.
But yes, kids. I mean, thank you. I was curious about like the goings on behind the scenes on these crossover things. That how different
some
it was.
Are more complicated than others as time goes on too. So he's in that sweet '90s spot.
Well,
exactly.
Well, now it's DC or it's Disney and Warner, so now I guess it's
right.
Difficult thing. All right. Before we get to your plugs, I'll give you your homework for next time. I was thinking, well, you and everyone listening to this thought we could cover Elektra, Root of Evil.
Okay. All the whole series. Sure.
Yeah. What was that, like 4 issues? Yeah.
4 issues. Yeah. Okay. That sounds like a good one. I'll get my ninja costume out, and we'll go from there.
All right, Mr. Terrific. Where can people find you and all your stuff?
Thanks again, guys, for the invite. This is always fun. Please check out storymaze.substack.com for my newsletter and lots of backgrounds on comics like Batman and Daredevil and other things, as well as new writing and ideas about writing and just fun writing altogether. So please check that out.
All right. All right, kids. Yes. If you have any questions for Mr. Chichester, send them capesandlunatics@gmail.com or call the voicemail 614-382-2737. That's 614-38-CAPES. Or just get a hold of us on social media. Find links to all of that. You can watch this video on our YouTube channel. Yeah, everything's at Linktree, linktr.ee/capesandlunatics. All right. I believe that's it. Again, thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Always a pleasure.
You guys have a great weekend. Take it easy.
Hey, you too. Thank